All right, sorry, Bart. So before you start adding any value, you should have your proportions pretty much down. Here's my image. You can see it kind of up close, get an idea of what it looks like. Here's my reference. So I feel like all the major components, my lighting is still a little sucky. You can see all the major components are in there where they're meant to be, and I think my proportions are pretty correct. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to prep for adding value. I cannot add value until my grid is erased. I'm going to repeat that. Don't add value until you erase your grid. It's going to be real weird if you grid over value, or you value over your grid and then you try to erase the grid and then try to put the value back. Doesn't work out too well in your in my experience. It's not super good to do. So I'm just going to go through, and where I'm adding value right now, I'm going to erase. And luckily I drew light enough that my grid is erasing really easily. Doesn't look like there's any indentation in my paper. I might be erasing just like tiny bits of her like proportion. That stuff's really easy to put back. So now in the general portion of her face, my grid is completely gone. So now what I'm ready to do is start adding value. Start from your lights to your darks. Don't start with like the blackest part and work down. My words are good. Work down from there. Start light and work your darks. Add those in as you're going and continually darken your surface. More often than not, people don't create skin tones that match the skin tone they see. So here we're not light enough, or we're not dark enough to match that skin tone. Here, we're definitely not dark enough to match that skin tone. Here, this is so faint. She's definitely not dark enough to match that skin tone. There is no such thing as like white skin, especially white of the paper. So make sure that you're adding a skin tone value in there and you're trying to match the value that you have in yours, whatever range of light and dark it is, that you're trying to match the value that you have. One side of the face may be different than the other. So in mine, there's a really strong light source from one side. So the right side of her face is lighter than the dark side, where the shadow is cast. But make sure you're trying to match the values of what you see in your picture. You want to make sure you have all three of your drawing pencils because that's going to help you create the values that you want from your lightest to your darkest. You cannot make blacks with a 2H or an HB. It's really, really hard to do. You have to have your tortillions. Really good idea to have your sandpaper with you as well so you can sand them clean. So if you're going into a really light spot and you have darkness on your tortillion, you're not blending that dark graphite into it. You want a regular eraser and you want that funky kneaded eraser so that you can take values out without having to erase proportions if you darken things up. And I happen to find this like little baby pencil eraser. It's just nice because it has a sharp tip on it, but not a requirement to have that. So when you add values, as you may have noticed when you were doing your value scales, if I add value with a pencil, and I'm drawing that value down, it might look a little scratchy, especially if you're using the tip of your pencil. That's going to be really hard to blend in with any tool and not see the scratchiness of that. When you're using the side of your pencil, it's a little easier to blend that down and not create like a scratchy look. But when you're doing your initial first tonal value, like that light value that goes everywhere, and I suggest you doing it everywhere. Don't just like find the lightest spot and just do that area. Do that lightest tone anywhere. You want to build up your values. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my tortillion to apply value. For one, it makes your values really smooth. It makes them really easy to erase out with your kneaded eraser, other than like a sharp, crispy pencil will. So what I'm going to do on the side of my paper, like this is not in the frame of what I'm using. It's on the outside, which can be cut off later on. I'm going to take the side of my lightest pencil to create my lightest skin tone values. I'm just going to make a chunk of graphite on the side of the paper here. Doesn't matter how it looks. I'm going to take my tortillion or my blending stump, whatever you want to call them. This one's relatively clean. And I'm going to push value onto it. So if you're looking at it now, it has like all this value on it. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at the value of her skin and I'm going to try to match that with the values that I see on here. Again, you probably have to push darker than you think in values. So I'm just going to really gently apply this, kind of like a little bit of a circular motion to create some of my light values. And it doesn't stay on the tortillion forever. So I'm going to go back to that chunk of my 2H, and I'm going to go back into that skin tone. This also makes it really easy to lighten up later on when I'm adding highlights of where like the light is reflecting off her skin and creating a highlight. And again, you probably have to go darker than you think to match the values that are actually in your drawing. So starting light helps you just kind of get that base and then working your darker values in. Now you can see with like a little bit of a close-up, I'm getting that like lightness of her skin tone. Definitely not dark enough for what I have here. So I'm actually going to move on to my 2B, which will make a, you can already see that's like darker than the 2H's. So I'm going to press that into my tortillion. This one I'm definitely not going to push as hard because this value, like just right there, you can see that on the camera so much better. This value will transfer much more easily because the graphite is so much softer that it will absorb into the paper much more easily. And sometimes I'll even like lift this up a little bit and get underneath it so it doesn't look like I have a weird line down the side of her face. Now I might like actually go in and try to push a little bit darker where some of those values are darker, like in the corner of her eyes. It's really, really dark. So I can build up some of that value there. On like the edge of her nose, there's some really dark values there. On the edge of her mouth, there's like a really dark value. Under her chin, there's a darker value. But overall, her face still just needs to be darker. And kind of working in a circular motion, kind of going back and forth, will stop it from being really like pencil-y back and forth. Now we can see we're starting to actually get some of those skin tones that are matching. It definitely doesn't match the left side of the face, but again, look at these two next to each other. The right side of her face is so much lighter. But you can see I could probably go a little darker. Now, when you're blending, if you lose some of your proportion, like I lost kind of like the edge of her nose there, I'm just going to go back and put that in so I don't completely lose it. Now that I have like a base of tones here, I can go in and work with my pencils to give a specific tone to specific areas. So I'm going to stick with the 2B at this point and just start adding some darker tones in the areas that really need it. So like the inside of her eye. And I will blend this in with the tortillion or with like the edge of my finger or something along those lines. When you're doing hair, it's especially important that you work in the direction of which the hair grows, not like just kind of ramber-jambing all over the place. With eyebrows, oh my God, this desk is so shaky. I'm working on my daughter's desk today because I thought the lighting would be better. Not so much. And it's like a little baby desk, so it's definitely shaking a little bit more. Tomorrow Miss Hample's giving me a nice light, so hopefully we'll have some better lighting for the videos from here on out because some of this like is so much darker than what you see on the camera. So I do have a little bit of like reflective light in her eye. I'm going to try to avoid that spot because her eye is one of the darkest spots in here. You can't even really see her iris because it's so dark. But because there's a little bit of reflective light in one spot, I'm going to try to avoid that. Can you kind of see that in there? You can pull color out with your erasers, but sometimes when it's like a really, really dark area, it's best to just do a little bit of avoidance. So now under her nostril here is like another one of my really dark spots. And now because I'm going to blend some of this down with my tortillion, you're going to lose a little bit of the value. She's got shadow under her hijab under here. I'm going to add some of those darker values here. Oops. So I just like made a boo-boo on accident, and kind of, you can't even see it in the video. Just, oh, maybe you can. Nope, lighting is too poor. So I'm just going to use my kneaded eraser and push down. That way I don't have to like go back and forth, and I can just blend back over that value really easily. Now before I go too far, I'm going to take my smallest tortillion. You should have a little bit of a variety, and start blending some of that color or that value down so that it looks more natural. Oh no, my battery is running low. Okay, so get some of this value in here. She's got like a really dark value under here that's casting that shadow. The value in her eye. Sometimes we think that like where we're making the value makes someone look weird too, like, oh, they're making her eyes really baggy. But guess what? That's like what people really look like. So don't try to make them seem unrealistic. We are not Instagram filters. Her job is casting like a lot of shadow next to her face. That's dark. Her lips are definitely darker than the color of her face. Again, I'm going to try and avoid where those teeth are so I don't have to go back in and erase them out. But I have not pulled out the 6B yet. That will be like my last straw when I'm working on this stuff, because once you go that far, it's hard to come back from it. So I will in here get those 6Bs once I get these values established, but you really want to start with just kind of gaining values slowly and making sure you're putting them in the right spots before you go like hog wild with all your values. So right now I'm getting there, and I'm slowly starting to build up those values. You can see where I'm trying to accentuate them. I will go in with like a darker one in a little while, but I want you just to start today with just adding like a simple tone over everything and maybe starting to build up those darker values. I don't expect you to get really far with this portion today because it's hard to do to match values. It's hard to like learn how to use the tortillion. Again, a tortillion is like a pencil. Don't use the tip of your tortillion, because if it comes out looking scratchy like this, that is actually really hard to blend back over again. You will still see the scratchiness of your tortillion. So make sure as you're applying with it that you're kind of working in a really light motion. If you have the right value on here, it should transfer really easily. So start with your 2H's and slowly start building your values up. Don't start with the darkest darks. It will be harder for you to work that way. And that's all we have for today. So that's kind of your expectation once your grid is done to start working on this. We'll do some check-ins next week and some other more detailed videos. Have a good weekend.